Hello, and welcome to Past, the podcast about those who would never rule. I'm Veronica Fortune, and this week's episode is Not Such a Magnificent Life, Part 2, The Sons of Suleiman the Magnificent. Welcome back. Just a warning before I start. The weather here in Canberra is less than lovely right now, so if there's a sudden rainstorm in the background, you may hear that, but just gonna keep trying to record through it. Hopefully I'll get lucky and it'll be clear for now. Last week we left the harem in Roxolana's capable hands. And this week I'm going to start with the man in Suleiman's life, Ibrahim. I promise I will discuss his sons at some point. They are coming up. Suleiman's Grand Vizier, Ibrahim, should get his moment here. I will cover the system by which Ibrahim becomes part of Suleiman's life soon. Hint, it's slavery, but let me share a few things about the man first. Ibrahim had been taken from his Orthodox Christian family by Ishkinder, and I do apologize for this mispronunciation, Mihalugla, also known as Ishkinder Pasha, who would eventually become his father-in-law. And before anyone shouts at me who knows the story already, I know you will read that Ibrahim's wife was Suleiman's sister, and I've read it too. But Ebru Turan, an assistant professor at Fordham University, did a bit of extra research a few years ago and found out that this was unlikely. Her work is linked in the show notes and on the website. And instead of being the brother-in-law of Suleiman, it appears that Ibrahim's owner/guardian wanted to make him part of his own family, literally. I think an important question when discussing Ibrahim is, why would a man want a slave to join his family? And apparently, Ibrahim showed promise to the point that Iskender thought he would be a worthy groom for his own daughter. And he wasn't wrong in his choice. Ibrahim was seemingly charismatic and capable. He earned two names, Makbul, favorite, and Maktul, executed, which are a really good brief of his life story, actually. The role of Grand Vizier is often seen as analogous to Prime Minister, but the position had so much more power than the English Prime Minister, especially at the time. If you think back to Lady Margaret Beaufort, I think it's more similar to her in many ways. I haven't discussed Cardinal Wolsey, but it's not unsimilar to his position in Henry VIII's court. The Grand Vizier was the right hand of the Sultan and could sign things in the name of the emperor. Ibrahim was appointed to this role in 1523, 3 years into Suleiman's reign. It's a funny story how he was appointed, actually. The Grand Vizier that he replaced, Piri, had helped Suleiman start his reign successfully. But Piri's second in command, a man named Ahmed, wanted that job. Ahmed used Piri's age against him, claiming that Piri needed a retirement. You know, he's old. His obvious goal was to get the job himself. Instead, Piri retired and lived a further 9 years. And Ibrahim was appointed to the role. Poor Ahmed, he ended up retiring because he would never be Grand Vizier. With how Ibrahim's story ends, this wasn't actually the worst choice. Ibrahim was young, under 30, when appointed to this prestigious role. And despite this, Ibrahim had tried to shrug off his high appointment. An apocryphal story, written down well after the deaths of all involved, shares that Ibrahim had asked Suleiman not to give him so much, especially not such a high office, since he was happy with his lower offices and didn't want to have so far to fall. Suleiman assured his friend and trusted advisor that as long as he, Suleiman, was alive, Ibrahim's life would be safe. Let's just call that some foreshadowing. Now, Roxolana is historically blamed for the downfall of both Ibrahim and Mustafa. And I think it's both unfair and interesting. It's unfair because, well, we don't actually know much about what she did. Why? because no one actually had access to her. She was protected within the harem and the walls of the old palace. She wasn't an empress out in court making backroom deals, at least not during Ibrahim's lifetime. And even once she was a bit more involved in public matters, she still wasn't easily accessed. Bridge blames her almost fully for Ibrahim's fate. Don't worry, I will tell you what happens to him soon. Much that we learn about her was probably from courtly gossip, sent through the ancient telephone that was the 16th century communication. Like many women throughout history, and even the modern day, she is accused of using sorcery to seduce Suleiman and to get him to do her bidding. Oh, yes, I don't think sorcery has come up for a while. No, it comes up all the time. A cultural moment I can't skip over is that the Ottoman imperial family wrote poetry under pen names. Suleiman's was Mihibi, Mustafa's was Mulisi, Bayezid was Sahi, Shinganar's was Zarifi, and Selim's was Selimi. Yeah, that last one wasn't very creative. I can't find the English translations for his sons, but Suleiman's most famous poem does describe Roxolana's eyes as being full of mischief and shares that she had beautiful hair. And I guess this is where I find the accusations against her to be interesting. Someone whom we know so little about, as in her actual activities, is blamed for taking down the second most powerful man in her husband's empire. That tells me something. When a woman is given power, as in the idea of power is transcribed onto her, during a period of history that we know women didn't have extensive power, it tells me that men were afraid of something about her. She may have had that actual sway with her spouse. She may have had the intelligence to see 5 moves ahead, and her spouse may have known that. She may have been so beautiful that she could lead 1,000 ships to war. Oh, wait, that was our last episode. Or she may have been that manipulative. None of these things are necessarily bad. Women have had to use the skills and traits they have to protect themselves and the people they love throughout time and up into this day. Powerful women scaring the men who write our history should make all of us pause and think, why? In Ibrahim's case, though, I think he got a little cocky. I know. Sorry, I'm sure you were all expecting me some deep explanation of how Roxolana planned it and did it, but I don't have one. Patrons, remember, you will get an episode about her soon. And hear the one reason I think Roxolana may be blamed for Ibrahim's end. I think his downfall, though, was his own doing. Ibrahim forgot the golden rule of being the ruler's right hand. Don't cut off the ruler. While in general, grand viziers are given a great deal of latitude over their decisions, they still needed to communicate with the sultan. A second rule is to avoid upsetting too many of the sultan's other bureaucrats. And Ibrahim totally did that. He had converted to Islam at a young age. This is expected for slaves in the Ottoman Empire, but seemed to be rather heretical in his practice. Reminder, the Ottoman Empire was a religious state practicing Islam. The Sultan and most Muslims within the Ottoman Empire were Sunni. In all branches of Islam, idolatry is forbidden, just as it is in Judaism and Christianity. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in the heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Exodus 24. Just a refresher in case you've forgotten. Like Ibrahim did. Ibrahim displayed 3 Buddhist idols in the capital. Now, these were likely decorative, but his birth family had been Eastern Orthodox Christians. I'm trying to be very careful with this next bit because I don't want to insult anyone's genuinely held religious beliefs. Byzantine or Eastern Orthodox Christianity included the praying to images of saints, Christ, and Mary. To many Muslims and iconoclast Christians, the word iconoclast means the breaking of images. This sounds like idolatry. Let me remind you again, that is not allowed. For the highest ranking bureaucrat in a Muslim country who used to be a member of a religion that kept idols, even as decoration, it's a really bad look. In addition, Ibrahim had brought his birth family to the capital. Yep, his previously Christian parents lived where he did, though they had nominally converted to Islam. He probably would have gotten away with this. Suleiman was a personally religiously devout man, but rather tolerant of others' religious beliefs. Unless you're Shia, the other main branch of Islam. I won't be getting into that today. But adding to Ibrahim's questionable practice of Islam to the rumors from other bureaucrats that he was negotiating with the enemy, and that was the end of Ibrahim. Veronica, did you just gloss over treason? No, I just glossed over accused treason because there's no evidence in it. The evidence would be in the Viennese archives and it's not there. Suleiman's main overarching military goal throughout his entire reign was to take the Habsburg leaders down a peg or two. First off, how dare Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, call himself Emperor of the Romans? There is only one Emperor of the Romans, Suleiman. Yes, I'm serious. The Ottoman Empire held the legalistic belief that they were the direct successors of Rome through the conquest of the Eastern Empire, and therefore, they were the Roman emperors. So just sit down, Charles V. Also, Suleiman didn't love that Charles's brother, Ferdinand, was messing with his allies in Eastern Europe. How dare Ferdinand think that he can claim the kingdom of Hungary when Suleiman had fairly defeated its last legitimate king? So yes, there were some Habsburg Ottoman Empire issues. Part of what convinced Suleiman to end Ibrahim's viziership was the rumor that Ibrahim had been negotiating with the Habsburgs against Suleiman's interests. And as I said, there is no evidence of this, but the earworm persisted. Suleiman and Ibrahim had been closer than one would expect two seemingly heterosexual men to be. At least there were rumors. The two had, throughout their younger years, slept in each other's residences and sometimes the same bed. I actually don't see anything weird about this. They were very close, as in friends, and Ibrahim had been Suleiman's advisor for most of his life. If you go over to your friend's house for dinner and it gets to be a bit too late, you're discussing European strategy, then you end up spending the night, right? Sometimes on campaign it gets cold. I don't know. I assume most rulers are just like normal people when it comes to their sexual interests, and that it's a spectrum. We don't have evidence one way or the other, but we know that Suleiman was deeply attached to his long-term female partner. And Ibrahim had children with his wife. Again, it's a spectrum. This familiarity, though, did bite Ibrahim in the end. In March 1536, he was invited to dinner with Suleiman. After dinner, he was taken to his rooms in the Sultan's palace and murdered. Suleiman had hired an assassin to kill his longtime friend, the one whom he promised would always live as long as Suleiman was alive. Now, Ibrahim had interacted with Suleiman's sons and had a favorite to succeed his friend, Mustafa. I think this support was coincidental to his death, not the cause of it. At the point of Ibrahim's death, Mustafa was really the only son who could have succeeded and been acceptable. Muhammad was 15 at the most, Selim was 11, Bayezid was 9, and Shinghanger was only 4 or 5. It doesn't really feel like some grand conspiracy on the part of Roxolana to me. Just a vizier overreaching. Now, I'm going to get to Suleiman's sons. Yay! Let's look at Mustafa, since this episode of the miniseries has a lot to do with him now that we've killed off Ibrahim. Mustafa's destiny for greatness had actually first been pointed out when he was 11. Suleiman's advisors noted that at that age, he was intelligent and self-aware. He was expected to be a great leader and had much in him that reflected Suleiman's own strengths. While Roxolana was Suleiman's favorite in the women of his life, Mustafa was his pride. His favorite son, though, does appear to have been his youngest, Shinghanger. Shinghanger, though, would never have been considered to rule. He had been born with a physical disability, and at least during Suleiman's lifetime, sultans were active in military campaigns. Now, if you read either of the biographies I mentioned, or in general, a lot of online sources, you will read that Shinghanger and Mustafa were close, that the oldest brother was the youngest brother's favorite. But this isn't actually clear. Pierce relates a story that Shinghanger once asked his father if his deformity would protect him when Mustafa came to rule. And Suleiman let him know that, quote, "My son, Mustafa will become the sultan and deprive you all of your lives," end quote. Pierce claims that the brothers weren't close, while Kraut claims that they were. Why am I discussing Shinghanger? Well, he and Mustafa are about to leave our story. Plus, he doesn't get much airtime, so I figured I'd give him a tiny bit. Before I get there, though, I need to talk about one more part of the Ottoman military political complex: slavery, and more specifically within that, the Janissary. Now, quickly, apparently this group plays a huge role in Assassin's Creed Revelations and Civilizations 4, 5, and 6, plus Age of Empires. I only bring this up because video games are fun and sadly historically inaccurate. Though, to be fair, I haven't played these games. I hear they're really fun, though. The Janissary were a military corps made up mainly of former Christian convert slaves. And I want to share that by Suleiman's reign, they were armed with firearms, which apparently makes them the first standing army to be such. Standing army should be emphasized. There were two ways the Ottoman state procured slaves for the Janissary: the practice of tax on the slave trade at a rate of 1/5, and the devshirme. Of this fifth, suitable male children would be brought up as an elite organized fighting force. They would convert to Islam, nominally by choice, go through ritual circumcision. Theoretically, those born into Islam were not welcome into this force because enslaving a fellow Muslim was haram, or forbidden. But as this force grew in size and prestige, some lower status Muslim parents would bribe officials to have their sons included because it gave their children a chance at a better life. These parents would use the devshirme as their means to have their children brought into the sphere of Ottoman power. Let me emphasize here, this corps was so prestigious that free, as in not enslaved people, would allow their children to be enslaved to join it. Devshirme was the taking of boys from non-Muslim, non-Jewish subjects. Those slaves who were not suitable to become Janissary would become civil servants, and women that had been taken as tax would often be brought into the harem if they were young and attractive, and other women would be often used as domestic servants. I will note that the Ottomans practiced more of a city and domestic slavery than a farm slavery. So it is quite different, but at the end of the day, regardless, it's still slavery. It's a system that is truly alien to anyone living in the world I live in, but from the perspective of the Sultan, it made a lot of sense. The Ottoman Empire was multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and vast. If he allowed too much power to rest in the hands of the Islamic elite in Istanbul, he risked being usurped. This system is how Ibrahim came into Suleiman's service. It's likely how both of his primary concubines entered this story. It is a system that should not work in this day and age and should seem odd to us, but it succeeded for 4 centuries in the case of the Janissary and 2 in the case of the devshirme. And remember, during this time, slavery or serfdom may have been mostly eliminated in Western Europe proper, but it was exported to the various colonies in the Americas, and forms were practiced within the naval tradition still. As you can imagine, a standing army was powerful, and over time, it became political. The Janissary often had a preferred candidate for sultan, and in the 1550s, it was Mustafa. Mustafa had been careful. He had shown good decision-making while a governor. He had avoided even suggestions of rebellion or planning anything similar to his grandfather, Selim I. The kings of Europe were terrified of him leading because he was showing the signs that he would be just as powerful as his father and may have been even more intelligent. While Mustafa had the support of the Janissary, he lacked the support of the bureaucracy, or at least the most important member. After the death of Ibrahim, Suleiman appointed a short-serving vizier named Ayas Mehmed, who died in office. Following him were two other short-serving viziers, who lived long post-vizier lives. But in 1544, Suleiman appointed his son-in-law, Rustem, as his vizier. Rustem was married to Miriam Sultan, Roxolana's only daughter. Remember how I said I don't think Roxolana had much to do with Ibrahim's death? Right, that's still true, but I think she had a lot to do with Mustafa's death, and one further death that relates to his. I'm fully willing to give women credit for the powerful things they do, good or bad. Rustem was actually successful in his own right. His marriage to Miriam was kind of a reward prior to his appointment as vizier. Don't forget, throughout history, many women have either been hostages married to their jailers or rewards for service. This is the time period that we start to know a bit more about Roxolana, because this is the period when she lived outside of the harem. We also know a bit more about Miriam because her letters at this time and her close work with her father in the coming years. Before smearing them by killing off Mustafa, let's look at what he was doing. He had been the governor of Amasya, a province more than 500 kilometers to the east of Istanbul, since 1541. And as was tradition, his mother was with him. His son, Mehmed, had been born in 1546. Like all unsuccessful male-line grandchildren, we don't know much about him. From the time he left Istanbul in 1533, Mustafa didn't see his father until 1548, so about 15 years or so. This wasn't because Suleiman didn't care about his son. They wrote regularly. Plus, Mustafa's tutors and advisors shared their assessment of Mustafa's skills with his father regularly. It was simply that the Ottoman Empire was vast, and Suleiman was trying to make it more vast. To do this, he needed to manage politics in Istanbul, military affairs on his border, and his sons were meant to take care of his various districts. Mustafa's brothers, Mehmed and Selim, had joined their father on campaign, likely due to their younger age, while Mustafa was governing. Remember, this Mehmed died prior to any family struggles. When Mustafa finally met with his father, it was while Suleiman was marching with his army towards Persia, ruled by the Safavid dynasty. I'm not going to go through the entire socio-political religious reason for this upcoming war, known as the Ottoman Safavid War, because it's messy and complicated, but most importantly, it has little to do with Mustafa and his life, or end of said life. Selim did join their father on this campaign, though, just something you should be aware of. And Suleiman won, which is great for him. Mustafa and Suleiman met in the Sultan's tent in Sivas. Their discussions went well. Mustafa presented himself as a dutiful son who was loyal to his father, which by most accounts, he was. And Suleiman was kind to his son and treated him publicly with the respect a prince should receive. Suleiman left Mustafa's province and continued on to Persia, again, winning this eventual fight. To outsiders, it wouldn't appear that anything was wrong. Earlier, I mentioned Mustafa's half-sister's husband, Rustem. By the time of Suleiman and Mustafa's meeting, Rustem had been appointed Grand Vizier. He was also joining Suleiman on this campaign. Rustem and his wife had a favored candidate to succeed Suleiman, her younger brother, Bayezid. Let me emphasize, from all my research, I think everyone who had heard of Suleiman had a favored candidate to succeed him. It was just the way politics in the empire played out. Europe wanted anyone except Mustafa. Roxolana wanted one of her sons, and authors disagree about which son, but one of hers would do. And her daughter and son-in-law wanted Bayezid. And Suleiman, well, he just wanted his sons not to kill him, I think. This political disunity put Suleiman's empire in a precarious situation. He really couldn't go fight in Europe if he didn't know his empire would remain stable. He had, for the moment, taken care of his Persian problem, but it could flare up again. His oldest son was seemingly loyal, but Mustafa was showing promise, and he knew his brothers and stepmother had it out for him. If I'm completely honest, I think Suleiman would have picked his youngest son, just based on their reported interactions. But as we know, that wasn't possible. Well, actually, at the very end of the next episode, I'm going to suggest a way it might have been in a dreamland. Mustafa, though, would have been the right choice, at least from the perspective of making the empire stronger. But he didn't have a man in his father's ear. His brothers did, though. They had a man, Rustem, and two women, their mother, Roxolana, and their sister, Mirama. It's easy to see that there was no way for Mustafa to win, unless he did what his grandfather, Selim, had done. Here's the thing. Mustafa never made a move against his father, but Suleiman thought he did. How, you ask? Well, Rustem wasn't just telling Suleiman that his son was a danger. No, he was forging documents to see to it that Suleiman believed his oldest son was out to get him. It's not paranoia if it's real, right? Even if it's fake real. This isn't to say that Mustafa didn't make some mistakes. He basically held his own altar court without his father's consent. He was visited by foreign ambassadors, again, without his father's consent or even prior knowledge. In his defense, he did this in his father's name, not his own, and more importantly, in his father's support. He was seen as Suleiman's ally by the European courts. Had Mustafa been a prince in, say, 1633, he probably would have been fine. And for those who are wondering why I picked that date, remember that 1603 was the first time a sultan didn't kill his brothers. So I figured 30 years after that to give the new system time to settle. Those who know will be giggling now. Mustafa, in 1633, could have been seen as an active prince, assisting his father in organizing the rule of his empire. But no, Mustafa didn't seem to realize that he was alive in the 1550s. And with that, going to leave you all hanging. I'm sorry. That really is so mean, but I need to set a limit or my voice would just collapse before I finish recording these. I promise you will get the concluding episode next week. Thank you all again, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Past. I can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at PastPod. That's PASSEDPOD. Please feel free to email me at pastpod@gmail.com. I have a Patreon that can be found at patreon.com/pastpod.